I was shocked when I heard that there was a warrant for my son's arrest. My mind went blank, and I couldn't understand why he was in trouble. The police officer explained that he was suspected of stealing money and was seen heading towards our house. I tried to deny it, insisting that my son would never do such a thing. Feeling overwhelmed, I tried to stop the officers from entering, but they insisted on talking to me. They mentioned that someone saw his face, making denial difficult. I was anxious, and the officer shared the news with what seemed like a triumphant expression. I couldn't believe it. My son was involved in theft. Despite my shock, I firmly denied the accusation. I'm a 50-year-old housewife living happily with my family. We built our house with our savings, and I couldn't fathom my son being involved in such a crime. As the officers explained the situation, I felt my mind going blank, but I stood my ground, saying it was impossible. The officer seemed tired, but I was certain of my son's innocence. Despite recent challenges in our lives, I couldn't believe that my son would run away with cash. I found solace in simple activities, like watching TV to escape reality. Despite feeling physically tired, I tried to convince myself that taking a break was necessary. The drama on TV didn't register in my mind, and my thoughts remained cloudy, grappling with the unexpected situation involving my son. Suddenly, I caught sight of numerous certificates and trophies at the edge of my vision. They were proudly awarded to my son Oliver for his outstanding achievements in soccer. He was genuinely a son to be proud of. As thoughts about his accomplishments filled my mind, the doorbell rang. Wondering who it could be, I quickly turned down the TV and got up from the sofa. Perhaps it was something sent by my mother-in-law. She often sends vegetables without notice, citing her dislike for detailed communication. Or maybe the items I ordered online had arrived. Lately, my son has been into online shopping, and my husband, influenced by him, has also started exploring the world of internet shopping. So that was a possibility. Lost in these thoughts, I went to the entrance without being particularly cautious. If only I had checked the intercom camera, then I wouldn't have been so startled. Unfortunately, without any suspicion, I headed straight to the entrance without looking at the monitor. "Yes, I'll open it right away," I said as I opened the front door. To my astonishment, 3 police officers stood there. "Hello, is this the residence of the Smith family?" one of them asked. "Yes, it is, but you're police officers, aren't you?" "What can I do for you?" I inquired. There they were, 3 police officers at the entrance, just like the ones I often saw in dramas I casually watched. I was truly surprised, even when I haven't done anything wrong. Seeing police officers makes me nervous and tense, as if I've unknowingly caused trouble somewhere. Gripping the doorknob tightly, one of the officers showed me some papers. I couldn't tell what it was at a glance and squinted to see better. Then, in a cold voice, the officer holding the paper said, "There's a warrant out for your son's arrest." Hearing those words, my mind went completely blank. What? Why is my son going to be arrested? What does it mean? Has he done something wrong? These questions raced through my mind as I stood frozen at the entrance, speechless. The officers stepped inside, clearly intending not to let me close the door. Overwhelmed by the 3 imposing men, I felt anxious and tried to close the door quickly, but the officers pressed their feet against it to keep it open. Fear filled me. "Your son is here, isn't he? May we come in and talk for a bit?" One officer asked. "If you're not hiding anything, you wouldn't mind letting us in, right?" "Please wait a moment," I stammered, trying to stop them from entering. I pushed against their chests, bracing my feet to keep them out. "Excuse me, I don't understand what this is all about. Could you please explain what's going on?" I appealed to the officers. I had no idea why there was a warrant, for what exactly. The officer holding the warrant folded it and sighed deeply. "Ma'am, there have been a series of thefts in this area recently. According to witnesses, the suspect looks a lot like your son. It seems he took off with cash and ran toward this house. Some people have seen his face clearly, so it will be hard to deny it." The officer spoke triumphantly. "Theft, my son? No way." As I realized this, my mind started going blank, but I somehow managed to listen to the officer standing in front of me. The officer then took out another document and unfolded it, not showing it to me. He started talking about something related to the contents of the document. It appears you're involved in several theft cases. The total damage amounts to about $500,000. However, considering your son's youth, the victims are willing to settle, he said. $500,000? No way. My child couldn't have done such a thing. It's impossible. I exclaimed in shock. The officer, looking tired, responded, I understand how you feel. Every parent says the same thing. You think your son couldn't possibly be involved in theft. Well, we need you to prepare the $500,000, and we'll discuss this further with your son, the officer said. While looking at the officer's face, I reached for the front door again, deep in thought. Could you please wait outside for a moment? I asked. No, we'll wait inside, he replied. I need to use the bathroom. You can't just barge into a house without permission while the homeowner is in the bathroom, right? Or can't you wait for just 5 minutes while I go? I blurted out, trying to buy some time to calm down. The physically imposing male officers were frightening, and more than anything, I wanted to close the door. Please let me use the bathroom. I'm at my limit. I will listen to everything properly afterward, I pleaded. The officer began to respond, Mom, this is bad. I'm about to have an accident, and my words made him hesitate for a moment. This was my chance. I quickly closed the front door, and then I heard a loud thud, probably the sound of the officer knocking or kicking the door. Without hesitating, I immediately locked it. The moment the lock clicked, a torrent of emotions flooded over me, relief, fear, and many questions. Ma'am, please open the door. The officer's voice boomed, accompanied by the sound of him pounding on the door. Worried about bothering the neighbors, I slowly moved away from the entrance. I'll be right back, I said, rushing into the bathroom. I didn't need to use it, but I thought maybe I should calm down. Calm down. I muttered to myself, trying desperately to soothe my nerves. Gradually, my thoughts began to organize themselves. While thinking, I sat on the toilet and grabbed some toilet paper, my hands trembling. Oliver couldn't be involved in a crime. It must be a misunderstanding. I decided to face the officers with confidence, as I had nothing to hide. About 5 minutes later, I resolved to return to the front door. After taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and faced the officers again. Excuse me, ma'am, the officer called out loudly. I chanted to myself that I needed to stay calm no matter what. Your son hasn't tried to escape in the meantime, has he? Please allow us to search the house, the officer requested. He hasn't done anything like that. I'll say it again, my son hasn't committed any theft. It's impossible. In the first place, even if you say that, we can't just take your word for it. There are witness testimonies and camera footage. If you cover for your son, you could also be implicated. Camera? You didn't mention that before, I pointed out. We mentioned it because it seems you won't admit it. There is evidence. Earlier, you said he resembled the suspect, but now you're asserting it's my son. Your story keeps changing, doesn't it? Look, ma'am, I understand it's hard to accept. The officer continued, relentlessly pressing on and ignoring my questions. His words lacked consistency and something felt off. The information kept changing, and something was just not right. Upon closer inspection, the police uniforms even looked like costumes from a drama. I stared intently at the face of the youngest-looking officer, and he quickly averted his gaze. When he noticed my stare, clearly suspicious, the officer said, "Ma'am, enough is enough. We're coming in." I protested, "Wait, you can't just barge in like that." Seeing my adamant stance, the oldest and largest officer pushed me aside and tried to enter the house. "Stop, don't come in." I tried to push back, but I was no match for the strong man and stumbled, falling on my buttocks. Ignoring me, the officers proceeded further into the house. I hurriedly stood up and followed them, yelling, "Don't enter without permission. Don't touch anything." Despite my protests, the officers ignored me and rifled through drawers in the kitchen and living room. As they searched through everything, from one end of the room to the other, I felt sick to my stomach. "Stop it. I'm telling you." I rushed to an officer, opened a drawer containing my and my husband's wedding rings, and slammed it shut. The loud bang echoed through the room. "There's nothing here. You can't just enter someone's home and go through their drawers." I glared at one of the officers, shaking with anger. It was the younger officer who had averted his gaze earlier. He nodded slightly at me before heading to another room. Eventually, the three officers focused on Oliver's room. The door had a plate with Oliver, so it was clear it was his room. The officers entered without a moment's hesitation. "My son is sleeping in there. Don't go in." I shouted with all my might, but my plea was in vain as the door opened. "We just want to talk," they shouted, then suddenly stopped. All three of them were looking toward the bed at the back of the room. "Hello, I've heard the conversation. I'm Oliver, the son." My son, lying in bed, slowly bowed to the police officers. Spreading his arms and smiling, he said, "As you can see, I'm in this condition right now, so there's no way I could commit theft." The officers, at a loss for words, just stared at him. The bed was a nursing bed with a pressure sore prevention mattress, and beside it stood a wheelchair. Numerous towels were stacked, and a call button was installed. My son was bedridden. "I am sorry. It seems we've made a mistake," said one officer who had been speaking in an almost threatening tone. Now, with a forced smile, my son returned the smile slightly, saying, "That's right. I'm relieved. I can't move my lower body. So I can't steal and run away." He pointed at the wheelchair. "I can't even get into that without help. I can't go outside by myself." "I see that was the case. We apologize for our mistake. We'll take our leave now," the officers said awkwardly, nodding their heads as they started to leave. Feeling anger towards them, I clenched my fists, wanting to say something. However, one officer didn't leave, but instead approached my son. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" replied my son. "What happened to your body, huh?" Steve asked. "Steve, is that you?" My son Oliver looked up at the officer with joy in his eyes. I approached the youngest officer, realizing it was Steve, Oliver's childhood friend. "It's Steve," I exclaimed in surprise, covering my mouth with my hand. Steve had been Oliver's close friend since they were young, playing soccer together. They had shared a passion for soccer since elementary school, practicing together almost every day. They had been very close friends. They had planned to join the soccer club together in middle school, but then Steve had to move away suddenly due to his parents' work, and they lost touch. "I used to watch you excel in soccer, thinking you'd go pro after college. I saw you in magazines too. But what happened, Steve?" I couldn't hide my curiosity, looking at Steve's incredulous face. Oliver lifted the blanket to reveal his immobile legs. "Actually, I had an accident a month ago, and now my lower body doesn't move at all," Oliver said with a sad smile. Noticing Steve's pained gaze, Oliver quickly hid his legs under the blanket again and turned a genuine smile towards him. "More importantly, it's been a long time, hasn't it? You became a police officer, but don't you play soccer anymore?" At this question, Steve's expression turned indescribably complex. He answered quietly, as if choosing his words carefully, "I don't have the talent like you." "I couldn't afford to worry about soccer," Steve replied. Indeed, I remembered Steve's challenging family situation. I recalled hearing about Steve's father, who didn't have a steady job and went out drinking every night. Steve's moving house was not just because of his parents' work, but also due to his father's debts. As Steve spoke with his head down, Oliver sat up halfway and began to speak encouragingly. "What do you mean you have no talent? You were always so hardworking. I was envious of you. You never gave up on anything and looked so cool. I could push myself because of you. You're doing your best as a police officer now, right? Seeing you strive gives me strength too." "Yeah, I'll do my best." "That's right. Next time we meet, let's play soccer together. Where do you live now?" "I'm in this situation now, But even disabled people can play soccer, you know. Steve kept his head down, his complexion looking pale. "Hey, are you okay, Steve?" Oliver looked at him worriedly, and then drops fell onto the floor. Tears silently streamed down Steve's cheeks as he looked up at Oliver. "Hey, are you okay, Steve?" Oliver's voice reached out, but Steve seemed barely able to hold back his sobs. At that moment, I noticed the other 2 police officers quietly pausing behind him. "Hey, where are you going?" I shot them a sharp look. Reflexively, the 2 officers, confused or intimidated by my gaze, looked flustered. It seems we were mistaken, and we need to conduct further investigations, so we'll be leaving now." They were trying to leave without a word of apology after barging in and rifling through the house. Just as I was about to raise my voice to stop them, Steve spoke up. "I'm out." He raised his head, tear-stained but resolute, and addressed the 2 officers. "What? What do you mean now? You were the one who said this house was wealthy. This is wrong. You know it. I'll tell everything to the police." A dispute broke out between the officers right before my eyes. One of them, driven by anger, confronted Steve. "Wait a minute." I tried to intervene, but my body wouldn't move with fear, and my voice echoed in vain. The officer's fist swung forcefully towards Steve. A dull thud sounded, and Steve's cheek instantly swelled red from the punch. He staggered and fell to the floor. Another officer kicked him. "You pay the money, clear your father's debt," one of the burly men demanded. I stood frozen in horror and shock at their brutality. After being repeatedly punched and kicked, Steve was finally released. Despite his pain, he looked up at the officers and declared, "I'll turn myself in. I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm not the person you praised anymore. I've always envied you. I have no talent, no wealth, and I hate myself most for using that as an excuse for my terrible actions. Don't joke about turning yourself in." Another officer snarled, about to attack Steve again, when a sharp voice stopped everyone. "Hold it right there." We all turned to see the source of the voice. A sigh of relief escaped me as I saw a real police officer in an official uniform, showing his badge. The fake officers were swiftly apprehended by the real police. "Sorry for the delay. Are you and your son hurt?" "No, we're okay." "Somehow," I replied. "When I was in the bathroom earlier, I had called the police, reporting that 3 men claiming to be officers were at my house. Their suspicious behavior prompted me to contact the real police. Come quietly, the real officer ordered as the fakes resisted arrest, but were quickly subdued. Steve, who had been sitting on the floor, was helped up by an officer. He offered no resistance. "Steve," Oliver called out. Steve stopped, looked back at us, deeply apologized, and then left with the officer. Oliver watched the parting figure until the end. After many inquiries that day and cleaning up the house, I waited for my husband's return. Despite his busy job and long commute, he hurried back and apologized repeatedly for not being able to contact us sooner. I reassured him that we were safe, and that's what mattered. Later, I learned that Steve was the only one of the 3 who had confessed to the police. They were high school acquaintances involved in frequent thefts in our area. They schemed to target wealthy families, falsely accuse their children of theft, and extort money from the panicked parents. The fake arrest warrant was their creation, and the police uniforms were merely costumes. This tactic had worked until this incident was exposed and led to their arrest. Steve initially worked hard to repay his family's debts, but as the interest grew and he couldn't pay it off completely, he reluctantly agreed to participate in this plan. He was told that if he provided information about the area he used to live in, which was a prime target, part of his debt would be reduced. That's why they were so knowledgeable about this town, and perhaps why their crimes hadn't been discovered until now. In the end, everyone was arrested and held accountable. The fact that they tried to deceive people by entering their homes without permission and impersonating police officers led to particularly severe penalties. However, my son wasn't disturbed when he heard this. He decided to turn himself in. I knew it. He's essentially a good guy. He kept nodding and smiling as he listened to me. It's really surprising that they weren't caught earlier, especially with those disguises. Did you know from the start that they weren't real cops, Oliver? I asked. Yeah, claiming to be a cop with such an untrained physique. Steve used to be much fitter, and I could tell it was a lie right away. Oliver had noticed the details. He later told me that he had felt suspicious about several things, like how he wouldn't meet his eyes and how his voice, though different, reminded him of Steve. I wonder how long it will be before he can come back, I said. It's not confirmed yet, but don't worry. He'll bounce back. He can do it. After all, he's still the same guy he used to be. Oliver spoke with certainty. A month later, one morning, I brought breakfast to Oliver's room. Good morning, Oliver. Morning, Mom. Has it arrived today? Oliver asked about something else before breakfast. I nodded and handed him a letter in a simple envelope. You're more concerned about Steve than breakfast, huh? Yes. The letter Oliver was holding was from Steve. What does Steve say? He wants to play soccer together. He's been staying active over there. It seemed like a positive letter had arrived. Seeing my son read the letter, I couldn't help but smile. Next to Oliver was a new type of wheelchair designed for playing soccer. Oliver had decided to start training in power chair soccer. He immediately expressed his desire to us to try soccer using a wheelchair and set a goal to play soccer with Steve. His motivation was extraordinary. While watching him, I made up my mind. Even if there are hardships and things don't go well, it's not just me. My always smiling son must also face many difficulties. Seeing him move forward positively is truly wonderful. Inspired by him, I resolved to live my present to the fullest. Today, I felt like I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. I hope you guys enjoy our video. To watch more interesting stories, subscribe to our channel. Thank you.